So hello everyone. I welcome all the people who are attending us live. Today we are in conversation with Tebogo, who's joining us from Cape Town, South Africa. Hi Tebogo, how are you?
Hi Sandeep, how are you? Thanks for having me here.
I'm very good. Tebogo is doing a very interesting workshop on the edVentr platform, which is called Path to Boardroom, and this workshop will also be converted into an online course on the edVentr platform. So before we get started, I'll just share a brief profile of Tebogo. She happens to be an international business advisor with 20 years of experience in building in business development, in building, developing, and implementing concepts from startups to sustainable operating businesses to extensive international experience in partnerships, reputation management, and economic development projects. And she currently works with businesses in advisory position. And her passion is coaching companies and businesses to unlock their potential and developing bespoke systems to meet their goals and sustain their success. So Tebogo has a couple of board and advisory positions, which include companies like PSG Sensors, Yale University, WWEP program, China, Africa, wildlife advisory program, and so on and so forth. So a very diverse profile, Tebogo, and the topic that you will be sharing through your workshop is path to boardroom, right? So
Yeah.
why don't we hear from you in your own words? How do you define path to boardroom?
I think the way I define path to boardroom is for people to be intentional about serving on boards or having an executive career on a board. But equally, because we work with SMMEs that usually they do not have an advisory board, which is the way I see it is that it's an essential part of how we're going to grow African SMMEs into multinational companies. So the idea is that we're looking at the people sitting around the board are very diverse. And we're saying, how do you get to basically have a career that you sit on board that is very intentional as an executive or as an SMME? How do you run your own board? How do you create capacity to run your own board? And how do you create capacity that you don't just get chosen to be on a board? You plan and you're intentional. It's not an accident, or it's not you see other people getting on board, but you're not getting on board, and you're asking around to get on board, but you're asking the wrong way and you're getting it wrong. So the path to board is that we're basically giving you a roadmap of how do you create this path from where you are to serve on a board. And if you're on a board, how do you get on other boards? What is the secret to success? How do you plan it? Yeah.
Definitely. Very interesting. I always felt that this is not a competitive area. As long as you have enough experience, you're automatically, put on some board or the other. But what I just understand, so this workshop and this course, Path to Boardroom, will not only be useful for people who are looking for directorship or advisory board positions with companies, but also for people who are part of the company, either as an employee or, entrepreneurs, how to manage the organization from a director's perspective, correct?
Absolutely, because a lot of people that work, I mean, you sit on a board while you're working at another company. So we're looking at somebody that's starting at a very beginning to somebody that ends up owning a company as a chairman of their own board. But also while you're working, we teach you how to create a CV or a resume that is for a board. Because as an executive position in a company has a different resume from an executive that's sitting on a board. So part of it
Definitely.
is if you're working inside a company and you know there's a board of directors in your company, how do you get to sit on that as an executive director? Because there's different types of board. There's non-executive and there's executive board. But we mainly focus on non-executive. But you can use the executive path to basically become a non-executive board when you retire or later on in life. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that's very important. So how do you position yourself that you actually report into a board? And to also understand the psychology of how does a board think, that they actually would want you to be one of them.
Definitely. Now, for someone who has been working all their lives in executive positions, what is the transition like from an executive member of an organization to a non-executive member on the board? What is a transition?
I think it's a skill. That's when you look at a board, it's they've specific skills that are usually required on the board. There's the three main ones that we'll discuss on Thursday. Then you look at the next level skills. So when you go on a board, there's very specific skills that are usually required. There's a low-hanging fruit, which is, as I said, the common three skills that you usually would have. And there's the next level, and there's also issues of diversity that will also say, what is your diversity add-on? So I think when you're non-executive, you're not operational in a company. You basically attend about 4 board meetings a year, but I mean, there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of research in between. So the transition would be to take your skills, as I said, the specific skills. You don't look at transferable skills. You basically curate a set of skills that you can actually go out and market yourself as a board, a potential board member. So you might, if you want to have for instance, my intention is that in the long run, my career is only going to be serving on boards rather than being operational. It means that you're not working, you're not an employee of a company, you don't meddle in the daily operations, but
Definitely.
you basically come in as and when you're required during board meetings or when you're called upon. So it's curating, as I say, you've got to be very intentional as a board and not just assume because you're an executive, you'll automatically become a board member.
Definitely makes sense. So, I mean, it's also important to draw the line in terms of, because it's for someone who's been operational all his or her life, where to draw the line and be in a position, which demarcates execution and oversight, which the board's responsibility is predominantly. Right now,
it's governance at a higher level. Instead of governance at operational daily audit, but you're basically oversight governance and you're looking at strategic growth of a company. So those are that's why I say it's specific skills that you think, okay, if I'm operational, what happens if I only have an oversight responsibility and you're not involved in the daily operations? So it's like a helicopter view of the company.
Definitely. And how do you, I mean, let's say, for example, if somebody has been in execution, they have that skill set, to run that particular organization or be part of that particular function that they are driving. Now, what are the key skills or expertise, probably from a corporate governance perspective, that a board member should have?
That's why I said the main three is accounting and finance. That's why you always find the audit committee. So people that come from an audit background, it's very easy for them. It's also legal, so you need to know how to do a due diligence, and that's also something before you get on board, you'll do a due diligence of the company. But those are like technical skills that you need to really understand. From a governance point of view, you need to understand your local laws in terms of we've got the King's reports here in South Africa. But there's standard governance that whether you actually come from a legal point of view or not, you actually have to understand that. And in terms of growth, strategic growth of the company, that also requires due diligence, understanding the industry that you're on, doing an audit of the company in terms of their liabilities, any risk that you might inherit. And I think some people don't even understand the risk of being on board, that if you don't take responsible decisions, you've got liability. But I mean, what we do starts in a lower level liability. But I think those are things that if you've been in a company, you would have learned how to do a due diligence, or we hope a proper due diligence, or you need to get training to do proper due diligence, or you need to understand the legalities, the national legalities in terms of ethics, things like ethics code. So basically, I said the main three is always audit, legal, and governance that you need to do. You need to understand your from a strategy point of view, you need to have experience in strategy that you can bring. I mean, some people get on because they understand diversity issues or critical issues that are facing the country at that time, and they're able to contribute that as a niche expertise in that. Some you actually have to have the people that are subject matter experts, and I think that actually happens in engineering. Or I'm a China expert if you've got a company that actually wants to do market entry into China. So you have to look at I basically have about 27 skills that I'll share with you to sort of, you got to fine tune, and you can pick 2 or 3 skills that you want to use to serve on a board, which you would have done research on. So you might actually find that there's already an audit person. So they're not looking for an audit person. So when you want to get on board, you identify a specific board that you want to get on. And then you do the reverse work to make sure that you've got the skills that actually fit in that board. And So that's basically what we'll do on Saturday, to teach you how to profile and position yourself for a specific board that needs your specific skills. Yeah.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. And Tebogo, you've been on multiple advisory boards. I just happened to read your profile, and I saw that there are 6, 7 organizations that you're advising, right? I'm not
Yes.
sure if you're a board of director as well, but why does it excite you? Why does being on advisory positions excite you more than, I mean, of course you're an executive position as well, but why take up so much diversity in terms of being on the advisory boards?
First, I think I've never had a linear career. I've always been involved in multiple things. You see, the boards that I sit on are very different from the work that I do. And what excites me is sometimes you see a company, you work with a small company, and you can actually help them, but you can't be part of the team, but you can contribute something. So my thing has always been, how do I contribute to the society? And with African companies, the way that they are is most of the time they don't have an advisory board. And I think it started with a lot of my friends will ask me for advice. And when you go to them 3 years down the line, they remember you gave them advice, but they on their business, but they didn't implement it because there was no sense of accountability, or there was
Definitely.
like a lot of solopreneurs are also very lonely in their business, and they don't have
Yes.
somebody that they at the end of every quarter they could actually sit and work with. So that has actually inspired me to want to sit on board, because a lot of the boards that I serve on, I was invited based on maybe I spoke at a plenary or I was working at a workshop. But most of them, after you give a speech somewhere or a presentation somewhere, they basically would like your skill, but they can't employ you. They basically would
Mhm.
like you to come in as it's like thinking outside the box type thing that you offer an entrepreneur. But it's also, you're not just offering that, because if you're offering an advice to a friend, there's no accountability also on your side. So I also
Mhm.
wanted to see myself as part of a growth and in my thinking process to sort of say, okay, in 2010, if I offer this advice, where am I in 2015? How have I impacted
Mhm.
the growth of that company? So it's
Absolutely.
also, it's both accountability that comes into it, and seeing ideas that are worth having growing, that are not just a brainstorm at a coffee shop. I know a lot of business is done at a golf course or at a coffee shop, but growth does not come from those areas. It's initiated there, but without an advisory board, it doesn't grow. It just disappears sometimes. So
Definitely.
my interest was on my own career growth, and also contributing, because I've had a very diverse career and I've had a window of opportunity in a lot of things, but some of them I don't apply in my specific role, but I still would like to engage in as a knowledge expert in those areas. So I've seen serving on boards is almost like an opportunity to engage my knowledge expertise, my diversity of knowledge.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
let us see this from a different lens, from the lens of an organization, right? As you mentioned that a lot of solopreneurs or entrepreneurs are lonely, right? And many times they have to take a decision for which they have to be 100% accountable, and it may come out of their own limited perspective, right? How important it is for organizations, no matter small, big, large, entrepreneurial startup or small to medium enterprise, how important is it for organizations to have an advisory board? And how, based on your experience, have you seen the contribution of an advisory board in the
Well, I think first thing that the advantage that you get, which sometimes people use carelessly, you basically will have a better letterhead, because the minute that you put a certain group of people on your letterhead, you've got 4 people and the bank looks at you favorably, your partners look at you favorably. As I said, when you're doing strategic partnerships, they can be driven by the people that are on your board. They open up introductions for you. If you've got a good board, as I say, when a bank looks at you as a risk and they want to finance you, they know that you've got a group of people that you're accountable to that will look after your assets. So, and I think what I've seen with solopreneurs that they tend to do, they start off at one point with a destination, but at the end of a year, like if you're selling education, at the end of a year, you're selling different products. You could be, you sell whatever, you could be selling t-shirts, and you need somebody to keep you on track and say, look, if you're selling education, stick with education. And the board is also able to look at other offshoots of your business that you might have a blind spot on. So it's almost like
organization?
having a think tank and having a governance. As I say, governance is very, very key. And I think something that we do in Disruptive Advisory Board is that the first thing that any board has to have is, or that it needs to fix, is compliance. We say compliance, compliance, compliance. I know marketers and a lot of business people will tell you that, location, location, location. But we're working in a location neutral world where it doesn't matter if you have a corner office or you've got the right address. If you're not compliant, and I think a lot of companies also saw it during COVID, because governments offered incentives, or they offered support to a lot of SMMEs that were not surviving. But the SMMEs that could access it are the ones that were compliant, that had their taxes in order, that had their financial statements in order. And when you're a solopreneur and you're trying to sell a product and do your administration, you don't have the time. A year passes by easily that you haven't done that. But when you have a board, you basically have somebody that makes sure that you're always checking the boxes or ticking the boxes. They make sure that you're compliant, because if you're not compliant, it is a risk on them. So you find that the board is very, very strict on compliance. But when you're compliant, you access opportunities that are mainstream. There are other opportunities that are available. But I think it makes your life easier in terms of, especially in Africa, where you need to access international funding or government support or subsidies, or if you want to supply to government and you want a tender, it's easier to access those opportunities when you have a solid board at your table. And you want to make sure that you actually, it's not just a letterhead board. As I say, it's a huge advantage to have a letterhead, but you also want to make sure that you're using your board. But also the nice thing about advisory boards is also a nice training ground for somebody who wants to serve on board later on. So, and as a compliance, even if you're on an advisory board, there's certain compliances that you'll be expected to meet when you're on a board. So, yeah,
definitely. Definitely. Like if it's a medium organization or a large organization, they can afford a high profile board, people with the right experience who are bringing in value. What about you? You've spoken about solopreneurs. The organizations may be small, right?
Yes.
How do they afford, how can they afford advisory boards?
Well, I think it's quite expensive at the moment, but as I say, once you're compliant, what we're finding is that, so for instance, the big corporations that are trying to develop local businesses, they want these businesses to be sustainable, right? And they'll bring in a consultant to probably serve on your advisory board and pay the consultant. We've got enterprise development agencies in Africa and internationally. So this is where we also basically try to get funding for them. An international way that a lot of boards also, if you're really small and you offer I think there's a standard rate internationally that's acceptable, which is about 0.25 of equity. And you could increase your equity based on if the board impacts on your profit margins, you could actually offer a fraction of that at the end of the year. Right. And there's also a lot of seasoned or retired executives are willing to give back. They're not there for the money, but they want to make an impact. They want to stay active. They've got a lot of knowledge. They're not employable. I think you'll find a lot of old white heads that are willing to serve on board. But they will not coordinate it. But they're willing to serve on boards that actually pique their interest. So, and that's what we do. We basically curate a board for you at advisory board and make sure we find these individuals. You've got young graduates that are also, like, they're millennials. And if your product is basically targeted for millennials, they're not looking for income. They want the experience, or somebody who, sorry if I speak fast. We spoke earlier about somebody who's employed in a company, but they want to serve on board. They're not looking to make extra income. They've got other interests. They want the experience. They could serve on board. You could also, if you're starting from zero base and you do not have an executive board, you could appoint your own network of friends, that you trust to be on your executive board without. You've got to be upfront that, I will not be offering you any income, but I'll be offering you experience. And in my own universe, I always say there's 3 ways that you get paid without catch, which is endorsement, experience, and recommendations. And if you're upfront about that, that's one way to actually also so there's many ways to skin a cat.
Interesting. In fact, this is a very, very interesting topic for not only younger organizations. When I say younger, maybe startups, who are just at a seed stage or an investment stage, or even small and medium organizations, and even larger organizations, to again, learn about the intricate details, of getting the right board members, selecting the right organizations for individuals. And I believe you've been doing a lot of work with a lot of individuals and organizations through your
Yes.
disruptive advisory board as well as the mastermind, initiative. So
Yeah.
tell us something about that, Tebogo.
So what we started with the Disruptive Advisory Board, we looked at if we have people sitting around a board, how do you educate them and create capacity that they actually are effective on a board? Especially with
Mm,
SMMEs, they've got a very low attention deficit disorder, most of them. They've got the owner's dilemma where they want to make all the decisions, or they see the board as trying to be the boss and they basically as ownership. So you actually have to skill that person as a chairperson, say, how do you run an effective board and what does being on a chair of a board mean? And so we basically, with the chair of the board, if it's an advisory company, we run mastermind groups as a backup or as a way in between board meetings, because the board meetings are quarterly, but in between the
mhm,
entrepreneurs left on their own. And we noticed when we're doing our test study, you'll speak to an entrepreneur today and tell them, okay, you've got a board meeting in 3 months. And in 3 months, when they come, they only prepare a day before they meet the board. And this just, it's not just entrepreneurs that do this. We see a lot of board members that will only read the board minutes a few minutes before they get to the meeting. So we've got two mastermind groups that we run. One is for entrepreneurs that will be board chairs. So they meet bi-weekly or monthly, and they
mhm,
look at, what have they been tasked by the boards to do. And because we facilitate the boards, you're able to say, I know that you committed to this in 3 months. There's a specific problem that you're dealing with your board. Now you need to figure out the execution in between. And if you feel at some point that it does not align with your company, we also work with you through the mastermind. So we've got 4 SMMEs that sit together in a mastermind bi-weekly, and they basically try and unpack and sort of, it's almost like you set much smaller targets. So if you're looking at a 12-week plan, to sort of say, if you've got a 3 month target, how do you make it small? How do you make it chewable? How do you basically facilitate it? And what we've done, what we've seen this do is that it creates another level of, like a secondary level of advisory board or a committee or an entourage or a tribe, as I like to call them, a tribe that you work with to achieve your board meetings. For the directors, they've got a career path that they're working on, and some of them struggle with the board meeting. And I think we've also seen that when somebody's serving on a board, which is part of my motivation to do this. But they're silent at a board meeting because they don't know how to contribute. They don't know what to say. They don't feel prepared. So it's basically cultivating a culture and a vision of what are you trying to achieve in a year in your career as a board member or in your
mhm,
individual career. We've had people that are doing their PhDs, but they still don't feel that they're good enough or they're not positioned to serve on board. So we basically give them that experience through the mastermind, and they gain confidence in that. So we've got the masterminds run with 4 people to maximum 8 people, and we basically follow different methods based on the type of mastermind that we run. So basically, that creates a more um, up to date, a more ear on the ground way of creating that capability. And that we realized that differs from there are a lot of board institutions or board training institutions that will run either a simulated board or that will give you a notebook and a lecture style way of saying, okay, this is how you do a board. You'll read a lot of articles about how to be on board, but it's very difficult to apply. So with what we do is that it actually helps you apply what you're learning or what we're teaching you or what you're experiencing on a board. You come to the mastermind to resolve a lot of conflicts that you might experience at a board that you might not feel confident to run in a board meeting. And for example, we worked with one of the board members. She basically was not comfortable with the board and felt like she wanted to fire the board. But in a mastermind group, we're able to sort of say, you're also part of the problem. And why are you the problem? And how do you resolve the problem? That by the time that they meet the board in 3 months, they basically had a peaceful, it's like in a harmonious board environment, and they understand
definitely.
why the board recommended certain things and how do they contribute to the problem or to the solution. So the masterminds are like an in-between that helps make people leap forward. And I think through the masterminds, we've also had some people in the mastermind that will basically, if you're entrepreneurs and one is in consulting and the other one is in production, we allow them to offer each other 30 minutes of each other's time outside the mastermind, outside the board. So that has also helped board directors find resources, or SMEs find resources at executive level.
So it's like a practical simulation of a board. I mean, you simulate an environment and people get to experience, what a board environment is like, and
Yeah.
how structured your board meetings, shall be. And one thing that I totally agree, it's something that experience is different from just theoretical knowledge. Experience teaches you a lot. The way of doing things, you can see the difference. It's similar to, how we can say we can read a book about how to do cycling, but
Yeah.
when you sit on the cycle, you're not able to balance, right? It
Yeah, it's
needs
different.
experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's just like it's a simulation, but the cases are real. So you know that when you give somebody advice, the next time, if I mean, you can choose to implement it or not. But when you see somebody that you give advice today and they come back to you in 2 weeks and say, "I've been able to unlock this opportunity because at the mastermind I was encouraged," or they call you out. They'll let you know that actually what you're doing is wrong, or they basically it's a simulation that is pragmatic. I don't know if there's a pragmatic simulation.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what will be the ideal profile of the person who will be sitting in your workshop or attending your course, Path to Boardroom?
We actually have had quite interesting people that serve on boards, but they're not feeling confident and they can't articulate themselves at a board, but they want to grow on a board. So they will sit on a board because they'll need to identify which skills do they need to leverage on
That's
at a
one
board.
profile.
Yeah, that's one person. The second thing, because we look at it, and as you see our logo, we're disrupting. So you might get somebody that's still very young and they've got a 10-year plan of saying, where do I want to be in 10 years? Do I want a professional board position? So you'll want to start now. That would be an ideal person. Or you have somebody who's sitting on a board and they probably accidentally got there and they now want to sit on more boards, or they want to leave the board, they want to resign on the board that they're in and be on another. So we basically say, if you want to be, so we take like about 3 types of people. And then the fourth person, somebody who's got a company and realizes that they need to have I would say if you're starting, start with an advisory board before you start with the board because of the liabilities that come with it. So those are the people that somebody who's chairing on a board, somebody who's experienced, but they've sat on a few boards, but they don't feel confident enough. They want to get a second position. And somebody who's basically at the beginning of their career and say, I want to be on a board in about, let's say, 5 to 10 years time.
Absolutely. Perfect. So I think all the people who are watching, you would know which category you fit in. And on our end, we invite you to attend the workshop and the online course Path to Boardroom by edVentr, which will be facilitated by Tebogo. And Tebogo has shared her experience, expertise, and knowledge on the subject. And thank you once again, Tebogo. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I hope to see as many people as possible on Saturday.
On the workshop. Yes. Thank you. Thank you once again. Thanks for all those who've been watching. Thank you.
Thank you.